USS Thresher. On April 10th, 1963, the nuclear attack submarine USS Thresher departed Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire for deep diving tests southeast of Cape Cod following a 9-month overhaul. On board were 129 men, including naval personnel, civilian engineers, and shipyard observers. The submarine had passed all pre-dive inspections. The rescue ship USS Skylark was positioned on the surface above to monitor communications throughout the dive. At approximately 9:13 in the morning, Skylark received a garbled transmission through its underwater telephone fragments of words indicating Thresher was experiencing minor difficulties, followed by a compressed air noise consistent with an emergency blow of the ballast tanks, the procedure used when a submarine needs to surface quickly. Then, the sonar operator aboard Skylark heard a sound later described as a submarine hull imploding under extreme pressure. After that silence, Thresher never surfaced. Thresher. All 129 men were killed. The investigation traced the cause to a failure in a silver-brazed pipe joint in the engine room's seawater system, which had sprayed water onto electrical panels and caused a reactor shutdown. Without propulsion, and without the ability to blow the ballast tanks quickly enough, in the increasing depth, the submarine sank below its crush depth, the point at which water pressure exceeds the structural integrity of the hull, and was destroyed in an instant. The implosion of a submarine below crush depth is effectively instantaneous. The hull collapses inward faster than the speed of sound in water, and no crew member would have had any awareness of it occurring. The Navy's investigation also found that the quality control procedures during Thresher's overhaul had been inadequate, with hundreds of pipe joint welds that had not been properly tested before the boat returned to sea. Thresher remains the deadliest submarine disaster in history by death toll, a record it still holds more than 6 decades after it sank. The wreck lies in approximately 8,400 feet of water southeast of Cape Cod, where it has been visited by deep-sea research submersibles and photographed in pieces across a debris field covering an area of nearly a square mile. The disaster led directly to a comprehensive overhaul of naval submarine quality control, a program called SubSafe, which established rigorous certification requirements for every system component and repair procedure that affects a submarine's ability to control flooding and surface in an emergency. No American submarine certified under SubSafe has subsequently been lost at sea. The program is widely regarded by naval safety specialists as the most effective implementation of lessons learned from a single accident in military aviation or naval history, a standard against which other industries have since measured their own post-disaster safety reforms. USS Scorpion. On May 22, 1968, the nuclear attack submarine USS Scorpion disappeared in the Atlantic Ocean approximately 400 miles southwest of the Azores with 99 men on board while returning to its home port of Norfolk, Virginia from a deployment in the Mediterranean Sea. Scorpion sent its last routine communication on May 21st and failed to arrive at Norfolk on May 27th when it was declared overdue. A massive search was launched across the Atlantic. In October 1968, the oceanographic research ship USS Mazar located the wreck on the ocean floor at a depth of approximately 10,000 feet, using underwater cameras, finding the bow and stern sections separated, and the hull extensively damaged. The Navy convened a court of inquiry that produced 2 volumes of findings, running to hundreds of pages. The cause of the sinking was never officially and conclusively determined, and remains disputed to this day. The court concluded the most probable cause was the unintended activation of a Mark 37 torpedo, which may have begun running inside its tube and then exploded, destroying the forward section of the boat. An alternative theory supported by acoustic analysis of hydrophone data recorded at the time of the sinking and re-examined in subsequent decades suggests the submarine suffered a catastrophic implosion after sinking below crush depth for reasons that remain unknown. Classified documents relating to the Scorpion investigation remained sealed for decades. When portions were declassified in the 1990s, they revealed that the submarine had a number of unresolved maintenance issues before its final deployment, and that some naval personnel had expressed concerns about the boat's readiness. The 99 men aboard Scorpion are still entombed in the wreck. The Navy designated the site as a war grave where it remains inaccessible and unrecovered. The Scorpion was not subsafe certified at the time of its loss, having been built before the program was established and refitted under a streamlined process that Thresher survivors in the program's oversight structure had long identified as a concern. Whether Scorpion's loss was connected to that certification gap remains one of the most contested questions in the history of American submarine operations. The families of Scorpion's crew have pursued partial declassification of investigation records for decades, and the volumes that have been released still contain heavily redacted sections, whose content the Navy has declined to characterize. K-129 Soviet submarine. In March 1968, a Soviet Golf II class ballistic missile submarine designated K-129 sank in the Central Pacific Ocean north of Hawaii, with all 98 crew members aboard. The Soviet Navy conducted an extensive search over several months, found nothing, and eventually concluded the submarine had been lost. The cause of the sinking remains officially unknown, though Soviet and later Russian analysts have attributed it to a combination of factors, including possible flooding through an open hatch during a battery-related incident. What makes the K-129 story unlike any other submarine disaster is what happened next. American intelligence services, using the SOSUS hydrophone network that tracked Soviet submarine movements, had located the approximate position of the wreck. In 1974, the CIA funded a covert salvage operation called Project Azorian, using a purpose-built ship disguised as a commercial mining vessel, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, ostensibly conducting deep-sea manganese nodule mining on behalf of Howard Hughes. The ship carried a hidden mechanical claw system capable of gripping a submarine hull at a depth of 16,500 feet. The operation attempted to recover the entire submarine. A significant section of the forward hull broke away during the lift and fell back to the ocean floor, taking with it whatever weapons and cryptographic equipment may have been in the forward compartments. The section that was successfully recovered contained the remains of 6 Soviet crew members who were given a burial at sea, filmed on 16mm video, and conducted with full military honors in accordance with Soviet naval tradition. The American officer overseeing the ceremony read the words in Russian. The existence of Project Azorian was leaked to journalist Jack Anderson in 1975 and published despite CIA requests for suppression, becoming one of the most extraordinary intelligence operation disclosures of the Cold War. The total cost of the operation was approximately $800 million in 1974 dollars, making it one of the most expensive covert intelligence operations in American history. The Soviet government officially learned what had happened to their submarine, not from American disclosure, but from the Anderson newspaper column. The CIA did not formally declassify the full details of the operation until 2010, 36 years after the ship sailed. K-141 Kursk. On August 12, 2000, the Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine K-141 Kursk was participating in naval exercises in the Barents Sea, the largest Russian naval exercises since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when a catastrophic explosion destroyed its forward compartments and sank it to the seabed at a depth of approximately 108 meters. All 118 crew members aboard died. The first explosion was caused by a leak of highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide from a faulty weld in a Type 65 practice torpedo, which reacted with the torpedo's kerosene fuel and detonated. The initial blast was relatively small, but the heat of the first explosion set off the warheads of the other Toiti torpedoes stored in the same compartment, producing a second explosion, 135 times more powerful an event, registered as a seismic event, measuring 4.2 on the Richter scale by monitoring stations as far away as Alaska. The forward 7 compartments of the submarine were destroyed almost instantly. 23 sailors in the aft compartment survived the initial blasts and retreated to the 9th compartment, where they sealed the watertight door and waited for rescue. One of them, Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov, wrote a note in the darkness while they waited. The note, recovered when the submarine was eventually raised, indicated the survivors had lived for at least 3 to 4 hours after the sinking. Russian rescue efforts were aided by mechanical failures in the rescue submersibles, and by the government's refusal to accept offers of help from Norway and the United Kingdom for 4 crucial days, citing national security concerns about foreign access to a nuclear vessel. Norwegian divers opened the aft rescue hatch in 3 hours after being allowed to try. By then, there was no one left alive. The Kursk disaster triggered the most severe domestic political crisis of Vladimir Putin's first term in office. He remained on holiday for 5 days after the sinking became public, and when he finally met with the families of the crew, the encounter was filmed and televised, becoming one of the most damaging public relations episodes of his early presidency. The submarine was raised in 2001, its nuclear reactors removed, and the hull towed to a dry dock where the full extent of the damage could be assessed. The Type 65 torpedo that caused the disaster, running on hydrogen peroxide fuel, was subsequently removed from the Russian Navy's operational inventory. Putin's handling of the Kursk crisis, including a television interview in which he smiled when asked about the sinking and gave evasive answers about the delayed rescue response, became a defining early data point in Western assessments of his leadership style and his relationship with truth under pressure. INS Sindhurakshak. On August 14, 2013, the Indian Navy's diesel-electric submarine, INS Sindhurakshak, was berthed at the naval dockyard in Mumbai shortly after midnight when an explosion ripped through the vessel and it caught fire. All 18 sailors aboard the submarine at the time were killed. The submarine, a Russian-built Kilo-class vessel, commissioned in 1997 and known in Western intelligence circles as one of the quietest conventional submarines in the world, earning the nickname the Black Hole from U.S. Navy analysts, had only recently returned from a major $80 million refit at the Zvezdochka shipyard in Russia, completed in January 2013. The investigation into the cause of the explosion never produced a definitive public finding. The Navy attributed it most likely to an accidental ignition of torpedo fuel or warhead material inside the weapons compartment, possibly triggered by improper handling during post-refit weapons loading procedures. The vessel sank at its berth with only its conning tower visible above the surface, firefighters spending more than 4 hours attempting to control the blaze before it could be extinguished. Navy divers entered the wreck approximately 16 hours after the explosion and confirmed all 18 sailors dead inside. The loss of Sindhurakshak was the worst peacetime naval disaster in India's independent history, and struck at a particularly difficult moment. It occurred the day after India's Independence Day, and only weeks after the Navy had celebrated the commissioning of its first domestically built aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant. India's then Navy Chief, Admiral D.K. Joshi, resigned following a series of submarine and naval incidents in the months surrounding the Sindhurakshak disaster, taking what he described as moral responsibility, though he subsequently stated he believed he had been made a scapegoat. The submarine was eventually raised and decommissioned, its hull scrapped. The inquiry findings were never publicly released in full. INS Sindhurakshak was the second major submarine accident India experienced in the space of 6 months. In February 2014, INS Sindhuratna, another Kilo-class submarine of the same fleet, suffered an onboard fire during exercises that killed 2 officers and injured several crew. The consecutive accidents triggered a parliamentary inquiry into the condition of India's conventional submarine fleet, which at the time averaged more than 22 years of age and was operating at roughly half its authorized strength due to delays in new procurement. San Juan submarine disaster. On November 15, 2017, the Argentine Navy submarine ARA San Juan, a German-built TR-1700 class diesel-electric submarine with a crew of 44, was returning to its home port of Mar del Plata from a training exercise off the southern coast of Argentina when it reported an electrical short circuit in the battery system that had caused a small fire in the snorkel tube, which channels outside air into the submarine for the diesel engines. The captain reported the incident was told to return to base and confirmed at 7:30 in the morning that the fire had been extinguished and the situation was under control. No further communications were received. 44 men disappeared with the submarine in an international search involving 13 countries, and more than 4,000 personnel from multiple naval forces combed the South Atlantic for weeks without finding any trace. Argentine naval authorities detected an acoustic event on the afternoon of November 15th, consistent with an implosion or explosion in the area where San Juan had last reported. The event lasted less than a second and was registered by monitoring stations that track seismic and hydroacoustic events worldwide. Despite this evidence, the search continued for months at the insistence of the families of the crew. The wreck of San Juan was finally located on November 17, 2018, exactly 1 year and 2 days after the submarine's last communication, by a private American company contracted to search at a depth of 907 meters, approximately 900 kilometers off the Argentine coast. Photographs showed the hull had been destroyed by an implosion consistent with the acoustic event detected a year earlier. The Argentine government faced intense pressure from families and the public over perceived failures in the search and the years of uncertainty that preceded the wreck's discovery. A naval investigation and subsequent criminal inquiry examined whether the submarine had been adequately maintained, whether the battery fault that caused the initial fire had been a pre-existing known deficiency, and whether the decision to continue the submarine's return voyage rather than immediately surfacing and waiting for assistance had been the correct response to the situation. The investigation remained formally open as of 2026, and no criminal convictions had been handed down. The families of the 44 crew members maintained a sustained campaign over multiple years, demanding access to the wreck, a full accounting of the submarine's maintenance records, and criminal accountability for what they described as negligence by the Argentine Navy. Several filed formal lawsuits. The wreck itself, at 907 meters depth, was not recoverable by any currently available technology, meaning the 44 men aboard San Juan remain entombed where the submarine was found, as their families continued their legal pursuit on the surface above. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones, and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments below.